I didn't even experience this whole idea of a cooperative design until a few years ago when I went to Origins and people started playing these with me. I go, wait, what's this? We're working together for a common end? What is this? What is this nonsense?
Creations, where we discuss the process, techniques, and inspiration for designing board games. I'm your host, Candice Harris, and I'm really stoked to be here today with Hermann Luttmann to find out how Dawn of the Zeds was created. But first, let's jump into a brief overview of how Dawn of the Zeds works. Dawn of the Zeds 3rd edition is a States of Siege series zombie-themed tower defense game for 1 to 5 players, which can be played solitaire, cooperatively, or as a versus game with 1 player controlling the Zeds. In Dawn of the Zeds, you play through a series of turns until you either win or lose the game. Each turn you draw an event card and resolve the phases for your selected difficulty level from left to right. The main action takes place during the Zeds phase and the action phase. In the Zeds phase, Zeds units on the indicated tracks move closer to the town center, triggering immediate hand-to-hand combat if they enter a space occupied by your units. In the action phase, players spend actions to protect Farmingdale from the encroaching Zeds hordes. You can move heroes and civilian units, forage to find supplies and ammo, attack Zeds, and more. You continue playing, drawing and resolving a new event card each turn until you either win the game by surviving and resolving the end card in the event deck, or you lose the game immediately when any Zeds enter the town center, or if you're required to place a chaos marker and there are none left to place. Hey Herman, welcome to the show.
Hey Candice, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
This is quite an honor.
I'm so glad to be talking to you today.
I'm sure your viewers are wondering, who is that guy on Candice's show?
Well, they're about to find out.
Okay.
I'm about to hit 4 years of being into the hobby because I came in kind of in spring of 2018. And one of the things I love about board games is how they draw me into different topics and themes that I never would have imagined myself being into. So if you would have asked me 4 years ago about playing a zombie-themed war game, I probably would have said, no thanks, not my thing.
Right.
But here I am, like really excited about Dawn of the Zeds.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Interestingly enough, I've been actually wargaming since I'm 13 years old, so it's a long time.
Wow.
But the more hobby side of the more of the general board gaming side of the hobby is about the same time you did, about 2018 when when I first went to Origins, I started discovering all these other games.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, we played other things besides war games too. One of the games I've played most often, and that's even with my war game buddies, is Robo Rally. It's still one of my all-time favorite games.
Cool. I've heard it's super fun. I've never played it.
Oh my God. It taught me that chaos is fun.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know how Dawn of the Zeds popped on my radar. It could have been from like my interest in just looking for good solo games or unique war games. But I'm really happy it did. It's been around for a while. You know that.
Yeah, about 12 years now almost. Yeah.
Wow. And so it's on its 3rd edition, and it's really hard to find, which says a lot. I'm sure that's really validating for you making a cool game. So what initially inspired you to create Dawn of the Zeds?
Well, like you, I also found it odd that I was interested in a zombie-themed war game because, I mean, I had a casual interest in zombie movies and zombie books and nothing, particularly weird. And it was really a theme that came to me as I was playing another game. So I was a big fan of the early years of Victory Point games because I was working 2 jobs at the time and I only had time to play these shorter, more compact games. And Victory Point games was really doing that, right? They were doing what they called folio games, games that came in a bag, right?
Okay.
And one of their original series that really worked well like that is States of Siege, and that was designed by Darren Leveloff. A brilliant, simple design, something that most game designers look for, right? You look for that clever mechanic that's really simple.
Absolutely.
And which I mean, I keep thinking of, let's say, Aeon's End, right, which is one of my favorite deck builders, and the very simple mechanic of not shuffling the deck
Right.
just transforms that game into something else.
Right.
So States of Siege was like that. It was a very simple system where you had multiple tracks, and it's a solitaire system, and these markers would come down the various tracks, and you would have to fight them off. So that went through various themes. The very first game was Israeli independence, and there was Zulus on the ramparts, and there was a number of them. There's a lot of States of Siege games. So I was playing one of them one day, and it was just this weird epiphany, right? This little spark, and I go, God, this reminds me of a zombie movie I just watched. And if I remember correctly, it was 28 Days Later.
Cool.
Which is one of my favorite to this day, one of my favorite zombie movies. And I remember playing the game, and I'm going, well, all these enemies are coming in from all sides, and you got to fight them off. And I'm going, God, that's just like the zombie movie I watched. So I thought, wow, that would make a cool theme for this game system. So I remember writing to Alan Emmerich, who was the owner of Victory Point Games at the time. And I just thought for sure that this was such an obvious application for this engine that I wrote to him, and I just said, look, I know you probably have 15 submissions with this theme for this States of Siege, but, I would like to try it. He goes, no, nobody's even thought of that yet. So I go, well, that's great. And there it was, so I just went into it with that. And like I said, I kind of like adventure type of games. Even the wargaming sphere, I like the more unknown and atmospheric and adventurous side, and so the Zulu theme, the zombie theme just naturally worked.
Very, very cool. So how did you get from your initial idea of like, I'm going to make a zombie themed States of Siege game into a playable prototype?
Well, see, this is where most designers break down, right? So this is, I would have to go back to my experience. So before I got into the board gaming side of things, I was a miniatures gamer, historical miniatures gaming. So I had painted thousands of small 15 millimeter castings. Well, other miniatures players, if you happen to be watching, know very well that we all take published sets of rules and we mess with them immediately. So you always start grafting on house rules. And in my case, that got so far that I started designing my own miniatures games. Cool. So I already was in that mindset of I knew how to go through at least the process of starting to build something that was going to work. So I could get past the humps that a lot of, beginning game designers, the roadblocks they run into, which makes them drop everything and say, well, I can't do it. So I got a good head start on that. Now, mind you, the first prototype I submitted, Alan said, no, this is garbage. Well, it was too wargamey, right? So even though Dawn of the Zeds in its current, version, a lot of people, as you said, think of it as a zombie war game. That's even less wargamey than the way I had it originally.
Ah.
Because that was my world. That's how I knew how to design games. So that's just what came out naturally. So that was an interesting lesson because it made me rethink how to do things for the general audience rather than the wargaming audience.
Cool.
So, even if you notice, if you remember the combat results table, it still looks very wargamey, but all war games, as you probably, well, not all, but most war games, as you know, have odds, right? 2-to-1, 3-to-1. So if you noticed in Zeds, I didn't do that. I said double, triple, more than, right? So I tried to change the terminology at least to be less wargaming. It's the same thing. Right. But again, you try to make it a little bit more accessible to the general gaming public.
That's cool. So how did you, and at what point did you integrate the story and kind of develop the characters?
Well, as a natural evolution of moving it from a war game to a more general game, now you're looking at, well, how does you have to get to the story side of things, right? So it's not just people fighting zombies. It's, well, what's the over, what's their motivation, right?
Right.
So, I started watching more zombie movies. I had read World War Z, and so then I started grabbing all these different themes from all these different movies and shows and books and grafting them into there. So obviously you'll see things related to stories you already know, and including fantasy stories and horror stories. I mean, they're all kind of integrated in there. That's what it ended up evolving into, is basically a narrative game rather than a I have to kill as many zombies as possible game.
Right.
And to this day, my greatest reward as far as feedback on Dawn of the Zeds is when people just write an AAR and they don't even talk about whether they won or lost. They're just telling me the story and how they laughed and, oh my God, I lost pickles at the bridge. And so to me, that was the most rewarding feedback, was that they were just telling me a story about their game. They didn't mention scores or anything else like that.
Yeah, it's just a really cool immersive experience.
Right. The zombie story is a story of narrative of what are the heroes' backgrounds, what are they trying to do? Even what are the Zeds trying to do? How'd they start?
Right.
So, Alan was really good with helping me feed back and forth the story, and it just kept growing and growing.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And how did you do you make your actual physical prototype in terms of creating cards, and also, their event cards, their fake cards? Did that all just come naturally with the story development?
Well, I did most of the event cards. The fake cards was actually Alan's idea, and he said, "Well, we can." So I wasn't sure about. So when you're designing a game, a lot of it comes down to, and actually, this is the first thing I ask a publisher now: what are my component limitations? Right?
Yeah.
Can I have 5 maps? Can I have half a map? Right? Can I have 2,000 counters and markers, or can I have only 80?
Yeah.
So, Alan said, "Well, we're gonna beef this up a little bit. So I have an idea. Let's do fake cards besides the event cards." I go, fake cards. I'm already drawing enough story to get these event cards. So we came up with all these fake cards for different. So the narrative just doubled up then.
Cool.
But I'm retired now, but I was an accountant for 40 some odd years. So I used all sorts of spreadsheet programs. So all my prototypes were done on spreadsheet programs. So, Excel.
Even the original map, right?
Yeah. I think that was Lotus 1, 2, 3, if anybody remembers what that was. So, I mean, most of it's Excel spreadsheet type stuff. So I learned how to do, because I did graphs and, things like that for the company. So I just learned how to do boxes and measure it out so I could get a card. When I print it out, it would be the right size and stick it in a sleeve, that kind of thing. So obviously it's very rough at the beginning. I did try to use as much clip art and downloaded art as possible just to inspire myself to keep going. And I still do that to this day. When I'm doing counters, I try to find colorful pictures of soldiers or tanks or whatever, just to make it visually appealing so I keep going.
Yeah.
I know that's very superficial, but it works.
Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, that's really cool. Do all States of Siege games have the same amount of tracks kind of coming into the central area?
No, they vary.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember, the first game I think had 4, maybe 5.
Okay.
Yeah, but they're all generally anywhere between 4 to 6 tracks. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. I mean, if you get too many, it's going to be too confused. It'll be, it kind of destroys the purpose of the design, then it becomes too much, right? Too few tracks. Again, that's the brilliance of the design. Too few tracks would be just boring, right?
Right.
So you got to find that happy medium.
Sweet spot. Cool. And then, Farmingdale, is that a real location or is?
It is.
Okay.
That was, Farmingdale is on Long Island in New York, and that's where my gaming group met. And when I was. Cool. Yeah, and that's my friend Alan Rothberg's house. And I just kept saying, well, I got to come up with a name for the town. And I said, oh, Farmingdale sounds like you know,
Creepy.
middle America,
Right.
very
Yeah.
average.
It's perfect.
This is part of the design process too, is how do you come up with all these names? If you're doing if you're doing a historical war game, well, you don't have to worry about it, right? But
Right.
if you're doing a fictional game, whether it's horror, sci-fi, fantasy, you got to come up with names.
Right,
So
right.
I wasn't that original with just coming up with names off the top of my head. So for anybody who's watching, if you're into the trivia of Dawn of the Zeds, all the original heroes are named after New York Mets baseball players. That's why you have
That's cool.
AG and Johnson and Piazza and Sheriff Hunt was named after Ron Hunt, who when I was growing up and playing Little League, Ron Hunt was the second baseman for the Mets, and he was my hero, so I named him Hunt. The only one
That's
that's
cool.
not named after a New York Met is Schmidt, which is actually Nancy's maiden name. That's my girlfriend's maiden name, and
Oh.
yeah, that was her. Well, I met her in high school, and that was her. She was Nancy Schmidt back in high school, so I used her maiden name.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love hearing like stories like that, especially yeah, like you said in fictional games where people come up with these ideas.
I try to go with a theme, I guess, or at least like a source, and then try to work off of that. I mean, I'm just not that original as far as coming up with names.
Hey, well, you figured it out. You figured it out.
And Pickles is just it was just a funny name. We had this little monkey called Pickles that we took on trips with us that was this kind of like there's a thing the kids had where they had to take pictures of this cardboard character everywhere they went in the world. I forget what it was called now.
Oh, okay.
Uh, but anyway, we did something like that with this little monkey called Pickles, and I just used that name because I thought it was great,
It
So
is. It is great. And I love having a dog character.
right.
That's awesome. So, how much playtesting was done and what was your playtesting process like? And I know, there are 3 editions, so feel free to talk about how any of them were.
Yeah, the advantage of doing a solitary game is you can do a lot of your own play testing. That's also a very dangerous path to take because, I mean, anybody who wants to be a designer out there, believe me when I tell you, you want to play test.
Mm.
And no matter how much you are convinced that your design is perfect, it is not. And you want other people to play your game and you want them to play it reading the rules without you guiding them.
Mm-hmm.
And you will be shocked at how what you thought was perfectly logical and made perfect sense at the time, when they interpret your writing, they come up with something totally different. And it's going to
Right.
happen. Believe me, it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So for Dawn of the Zeds, other than myself initially playing it just to make sure things work, which I still
Mm-hmm.
do to this day, anything I design, I play it solo first and just see if there's anything really obviously wrong with it. And then, and then it goes back to Victory Point Games, and they had their crew, basically their staff. I mean, it wasn't a big company, so we didn't have the resources that a lot of these, like GMT and Asmodee and all these companies, they have hundreds of people that they can
Mm-hmm.
play test with.
Right, right.
But Victory Point Games, it was basically the crew would play it and then send me back feedback, and I would fix things and send it back. It's a laborious process. I mean, it goes back and forth and back and forth. And I've always appreciated feedback, even negative feedback, because you want the game to be the best it can be.
Right.
And you have to be honest with yourself. And if something is not right, you want somebody to tell you it's not right. So you can, so
Yeah.
you got to get your ego out of the way and just tell people, be honest. And they were honest. It was a great crew, and we went back and forth. And we wanted that thematic narrative thing just kind of grew after a while. So people were feeding off of that and
Cool.
making suggestions, and it's a team effort. I mean, there's no
Mm-hmm.
design that's just one person doing it. It's a
Right.
team thing.
Yeah. Cool. So you kind of just went back and forth. Do you remember how long it was for the first edition?
It's always a few months.
Okay.
It's not something you do in a weekend.
Right, right.
It takes 2 to 3 months of playing back and feedback back and forth, and it's a grueling process. I mean, it's trial and error. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, I have an idea for a rule, throw it in there. Somebody tries it. No, that doesn't work. How about if you tweak it this way? It comes back to you. You rewrite it. You try it. I mean, It's trial and error and back and forth. There's no shortcuts, none that I know of anyway.
Right,
Maybe someone
right.
out there knows one, but I don't.
And I know when you make one change, then you have to see how it impacts other
Uh,
things. And
yes, that's happened a number of times, and it's also why to this day I don't do my examples of play until the very last thing I do for design. And
good call.
the reason is very simple when you think about it. I've done deep examples of play for a whole rule book, and then you change some rules at the end, and now your examples of play are incorrect.
Yeah.
And that's happened a number of times. So I just wait till the very end until we know everything's nailed down before I do an example of play.
Good call. Good call. Um, at what point did you start documenting and like writing rules for Dawn of the Zeds?
The formal rule book, probably not until we were like halfway through the process. So what I do, and I still do to this day as well, is I normally just do an outline. I basically do a player aid first. So
Okay.
I'm a big fan in all games I play, whether they're war games or regular games, of player aids, right? Something that you can hold in front of you with a short, right? With what are
Right.
the icons, what are the steps, and all that. So normally when I do a design, I start with that. I actually
Okay.
do an outline. It's a little deeper than the one you would give, with the game, because it'll have more notes and things. But it's basically how am I going through the game? How is it layered? What sequence am I doing? And then as I come up with ideas, I just stick it in that. Short noted, of course.
Cool.
And you don't want to start writing the whole rule book too early, because again, just like with the example of play problem, you're going to be typing a lot if you type everything all the time.
Right.
So it's best to just get yourself an outline, and then you can start expanding upon each section as you go.
What were some of the biggest challenges you faced during, designing and or play testing?
Well, one of the major problems always is playing time.
Mm.
So, if you're doing a big elaborate war game on all 3 days of Gettysburg, you're not worried about playtime so much because war gamers are used to sitting there for 15 hours playing a game. I learned pretty quickly that if you're doing more of a, now mind you, I haven't done that many non-war games,
Right.
um, but I have discovered that you need to get that playing time down to 2 to 3 hours. I mean, I'm never going to design a game that you can play in an hour or something, but 2 hours is probably a good sweet spot. 2 to 3 hours, I would think. So it's great coming up with all these ideas for a game and just jamming stuff in there. But now, if you're asking people to sit there for 5 hours to play this game, then it's a problem, right?
Right.
So one of the great challenges is learning what to shave off, how to get more efficient with your ideas, I guess you'd say, culling that all down from 5 to 3, and then hopefully maybe another 20 minutes off somewhere along
Gotcha.
the way.
Gotcha.
And I mean, I'll admit it's a tricky business because you don't want to lose all the great stuff you came up with. You just have
Right.
to learn
Right.
to be more clever with it and do what they call design for effect. Like I know what the effect is supposed to be for this particular mechanic. So can I design it down to where I get that end result, but I just don't take as long to get there? And balance balance is a big challenge. In other words, making sure that the game is competitive, that everybody has a chance to play. Now, fortunately for this particular game, Dawn of the Zeds, I really don't care how many times you lose because the game's really not about winning or losing, and we learned that after a while. Like after a while in the process, we're going like, that was fun. We got killed and massacred, but that was fun. And
Yeah.
and then we realized, right, well, that's the idea of the game. We're actually living out a story that we can tell our friends and our fellow gamers at some point over a beer, and
Right.
that's really the emphasis of the game. It's not so much winning or losing. So normally balance is a thing you look for. Zed's not so much.
Okay. I'm sure you didn't want to make it too easy. I know, like a lot of people do, who are into co-ops and solo games. Yeah, they want a challenge. So that's what kind of makes you keep coming back. But also in the case of Dawn of
Yeah.
the Zeds, it's that the storyline that you kind of that unravels
Right.
as you play each game, which is really cool.
Yeah, my general rule for solitaire games is they got to be tough, right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's what I call that video game mentality is what keeps you going back to a video game is when
Right.
you keep getting defeated and you go, oh wait, if I had only done that differently,
Yeah.
right? So it's that adrenaline rush you get of like I lost, but I could have done something differently to win, and you kind of get sucked in there, and that's what you want to do for a solo game. You don't want somebody to play a solitaire game, blow it away, and then they're going to just stick it on the shelf. They're not going to play it again. So you
Yeah.
want to give them a tough challenge, not an impossible challenge, but a tough challenge so that at least they feel that they have the tools to beat it, so that they want to come back and try to beat it.
Right, right.
So
Cool.
yeah, I mean, yeah, for a solitaire design, that is a definite challenge.
Cool. And, besides realizing, like, states of siege with zombies, great idea. Were there any other, aha moments that you had along the way while you were designing it, like adding something either storyline or mechanisms wise?
Not really an aha moment. It was more of, adding the fate cards on top of the event cards was kind of like, oh, this is cool because now we've gone from just a regular States of Siege game to now we're accelerating the narrative, right? So that was kind of like, oh, well, this is cool because now you got this event and the fate card actually has another twist to it.
Right.
So we were like really, getting juiced up now to, double down on all this.
Right.
The other cool thing we did, which was kind of an aha moment, is when I realized that because we were dealing with a zombie game and heroes, so States of Siege in the traditional sense is just you don't really do anything as far as moving pieces out or laterally. You're just kind of just making decisions on these tracks that are coming in. So Zeds, I think, was the first one that actually had you taking units and pieces and moving out on this,
Ah,
engaging the oncoming, right, and moving
gotcha.
laterally around the middle.
Cool.
So once I realized we could do that and it worked, that was definitely an aha moment because now we were in another dimension of States of Siege. Like we were adding a whole nother, like I said, another dimension of
Right,
this game.
right. Oh,
So
wow, that's so
yeah,
cool.
so those were definitely aha moments.
Cool. And how are the art and graphic design decisions made for Dawn of the Zeds? I know it evolved quite a bit from edition to edition.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm having the same case now with a game I'm working on for GMT and also some sci-fi games that I've been working on. And one aspect to that is, as opposed to wargaming, where with wargaming you're looking at either NATO's what they call NATO symbology, which are the X's and the zeros, and or a picture of a tank or a infantryman or something. So there's really not a lot of artistic license, in that.
Yeah.
But when you're talking, let's say, a sci-fi game, and like Dawn of the Zeds, now you're talking about where the art becomes part of the game experience, right?
Right.
That the theme is elicited from that art,
Yep.
and if you have boring, dull, colorless art, it's not going to draw you in.
Mm-hmm.
So even when we did the first Zeds, that was a topic. It was like, okay, we're doing a zombie game. This has got to look horrific. It's got to have this certain look to it, Pulp Fiction look to it, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's been maintained throughout, and you could, if you go on BGG, you can look at the first edition art versus the third edition. You can see how it kind of evolved. We had different artists along the way, so different people had different takes to it. But they all agreed, they all did a great job, and they all agreed that this theme it just has the ooze theme. So, um, and like I said, for fantasy and sci-fi and horror, it's a very important aspect to the game design that you want to get across to these people that this is going to be an adventurous experience in this
Mm-hmm.
horror world or the sci-fi world, and your art's got to convey that. It's got to reflect the feeling of the game. So, yes, for Zeds, we all made a conscious effort to make it look horrific and scary and funny sometimes too.
Right, right, right.
Uh, yeah, a lot of the artists put. I don't know if you look at the cards very carefully.
Hmm.
Like for the people for the ethical treatment of Zeds, and they're carrying signs around. I mean, there's a lot of little. My favorite one is Tim Allen did a map for the second edition,
Hmm.
and I don't know if you've seen that map, but by Lefty's Pass on the sign it says "Stay in right lane." so, so I mean, just little things like that.
Nice
A
touches.
little
Yeah.
humor, a little gore, a little horror, and it makes the game come to life
Right,
or
right.
undead, whatever.
Or the opposite. But yeah, it really
Yes.
sucks you in and creates a vibe for the whole
Yes,
experience.
definitely a
Yeah.
vibe, and if especially if you're talking about a game that's an adventure game primarily, as opposed to a win-lose game,
Hmm.
um, you that's really important that you get that out of the game, that it becomes part of the experience, because people are playing it for the fun of it, for the
Right.
story.
How did you come up with the name Dawn of the Zeds?
um, so, well, Zeds, I I know that we were watching a movie, and I'm trying to remember because, like I said, this is 12 years ago. I believe it was 28 Days Later because it was a British movie, right? 28 Days Later is a British movie.
Hmm.
And somebody in that movie called them Zeds because the British term for the letter Z is Z.
Ah.
Okay. So they were calling them Z's, but in English, British English, they were calling them a Z. And so then I was also trying to tie in the name to a famous zombie movie. So I was
Hmm.
going, well, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead. Oh, what about Dawn of the Zed, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, and one of the other games in the States of Siege system was called Soviet Dawn, which was about the Russian
Hmm.
Revolution. So I kind of tied in there too.
Right.
So yeah, that's it. Dawn of the Zeds just became is really Dawn of the Dead with the Z
With
thrown
Zeds. Cool.
in.
That's cool. That's a cool little connection there. Um,
hmm
and when did you know, like, when did you realize that the first, I guess the first edition was finished?
Well, it's never really finished. My friend Fred always says artists abandon projects; they're never finished. Right? So, uh, because you could keep designing your game, you'll always think of something else to add, right?
Hmm.
You'll always think you could do something better, which is definitely a vice that I have. Is as soon as I have a game published, I immediately think of something I could have done better, and then I try to on my next game I try to add all that stuff.
Gotcha.
So, do you know when it's finished? No. This is why I like publishers to give me deadlines. Deadlines help,
Gotcha. Yeah.
right? So if a publisher says to you, "Well, design this game and when it's done, give it to me." Well, they're not going to get it for a long time. So it's either a case of they give you a deadline, so I know I have to get it done. So then you just naturally start restricting yourself as far as, what you need to get done on that project. And then when you do it long enough, you just naturally know, all right, it's working. I don't want to mess with it anymore because if I mess with it more, we open up other paths of failure.
Gotcha.
So you just kind of develop this sixth sense of, when to stop and,
Mm.
when it's working properly. So to answer your question, no, I didn't know when it was done.
But the
The crew
publisher,
the crew will
yeah.
let you know when the crew will kind of let you know when it's done. And look, it's working fine. Let's just leave it, and we're going to go with it.
Cool. How did you, I guess, how between second edition and third edition, we went from having a pure solo game to a
hmm
solo game that could also be played multiplayer cooperatively. Um,
hmm
how did that kind of develop? That idea, and what was the process like of changing the game to make it multiplayer co-op?
Right. So the first editions. is only solitaire. That was the way it was originally designed. The second edition was solitaire, and I think we threw in a small cooperative rule. It was kind of just just added it on because see the thing is with solitaire games, and I know because people have asked me about this on BGG for years, and I've always told them, look, I played this game quite often solitaire with my family or my friends, right? So my kids would play with me, or my girlfriend would play with me solitaire.
Cool.
So I would say that most solitaire games are just naturally also cooperative games if you want them to be
Totally.
cooperative, right? So you let the kids play, and then you tell them the rules maybe, but they make the decisions, and you just move the game along. So with the third edition, it became a case of, well, there are these new things, these new game designs called cooperative games, right? Legitimate.
So yeah.
Well, and mind you, for war gamers, this is a totally new concept because all war games no, I won't say all war games. Most war games by their nature are two-player, you against me, right? So the whole concept of, like I told you, I didn't even experience this whole idea of a cooperative design until a few years ago when I went to Origins, and people started playing these with me. I go, wait, what's this? We're working together for a common end? What is this? What is this nonsense? And then it eventually became my preferred way to play with my friends. Get together on a Saturday, and now we're playing together, and we're all working on a puzzle together,
Right.
or sharing, grabbing a sword and going into a dungeon together, or whatever. And so, naturally, Zeds got to that point. Now, I knew nothing about designing cooperative games. Nothing. It wasn't my experience. So when Alan said we're going to do this with a different company, because at that time Victory Point Games got taken over by Tabletop Tycoon,
Okay.
and they wanted to do the third edition you see now, which is the big box, the deluxe super duper version of the game. And he wanted a dedicated cooperative element to the game. Well, he asked me, and I was like, I don't know how to design a game like that. I really don't. I don't even, So that cooperative part in the third edition is Alan and I think his wife and their crew. They designed all that cooperative. So the third edition is essentially the first edition, the second edition, the director's cut expansion, which was a set of cards that we sold separately. That was all the ideas that we couldn't throw into the second edition. We still had more ideas.
Cool.
So we had another set called the director's cut that you could buy and even add more stuff. So the third edition's all that jammed together. But now then Alan and his group created these cooperative mechanics that you see in the game now.
Very cool.
Other than designing the first and second, and I really have nothing to do with the third edition as far as the cooperative part.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay. Gotcha.
And that's admittedly, like I said, I really had no experience in designing cooperative games, so I do now.
Yeah.
Since then, I have learned how to do it, and what is involved in getting a good cooperative experience. I hope, and so yeah.
Nice. Speaking of, do you have any advice for someone who would be interested in designing a solo and or cooperative game?
Well, I tell, when I get this question about design, I always tell, the first thing I tell people is design what you know and design what you love. So don't design a game because you think it'll sell well or it's what the publisher is looking for. Stay in your lane, right? As they say, right? So if you know a subject matter, if you have a love for a subject matter, design that. So like in the wargaming community, if you're a new wargame designer, you immediately think, oh, I'll do the Battle of the Bulge or Gettysburg or Normandy. 8 billion games on those subjects, right? Find something else that you know well. Because I'm telling you, especially in the wargame world, people will know if you don't know it well.
Yep.
They'll find out. I've designed a number of Gettysburg games. I got a big one coming out, and I was sitting here literally all day long with books spread out all over my area here, researching every unit, where it was at what time, because a battle like Gettysburg, people know what they're talking about, right?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Do what you know, what you understand, what you love to do. As far as solitaire, like we said before, it's easier to play test. Obviously, you don't need other people to play with you. Even cooperative games, you can play all the cooperative positions yourself,
Mm-hmm.
which I do off a lot of the cooperative games I bought, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And but make sure it's challenging. Like we were talking about
Yeah.
before. Don't let somebody just win the game on the first try.
Yeah. Right.
Uh,
Right.
Other than that, I mean, just general game design is don't give up. I guess is what I could. People will give up. I'm sure there's people that have got folders in their drawer right now with game ideas that
Right.
they didn't go through. Find somebody else to bounce ideas off of. That's really important because you can get tunnel vision.
Mm.
So my good friend Fred Manzo has been my developer for years, and what he's really good at is saying something back to me that gets me off on a different track, right?
Mm.
So
Cool.
a lot of times, if you get stuck, you just need somebody to bounce an idea off of you and get you thinking along a different path. And to be honest with you, for me as a war game designer, playing all these dungeon crawls, and I love deck building games. I don't know
Me
why, I just
too.
do.
Me too.
And what I've learned as a designer, I talk about this a lot on the wargaming channels, and guys like David Thompson, you've had him on, right?
Yeah.
He's the on Facebook and stuff. We play all these other games now, non-war games, and not only because we enjoy them, but as a designer, I will get applying those mechanics to a war game. Because wargaming is, you kind of get this tunnel vision that it has to be presented in a certain way. So playing these other games, start thinking about other paths to do what the war game, not using traditional mechanics. So that's something that's been a lot of fun. A lot of my later designs, I've done a lot of that.
Cool.
Grabbing kind of so look for those outside influences, you know, to help you get past the humps in your creative line of thinking. Get people to just whack you in the head a little bit and go, oh yeah, let me go this way, right?
Right. Right.
So,
Cool. Oh my goodness. Awesome. So insightful. Well, thank you, Herman, so much for joining me today on Cardboard Creations.
oh, thank
I
you.
mean, it was
It was fun.
yeah, yeah, it was really awesome to hear the backstory for how Dawn of the Zeds was created and just to chat with you in general.
Well, I hope people enjoy the game. It's been great reading the comments on Board Game Geek, and it's very inspirational to read what some people have said about the game. I'm glad they enjoy it and have fun with it.
Yeah, yeah, and I know there are a couple expansion packs out there for Dawn of the Zeds, but is there anything new you're working on or planning to, is there any additional content you have planned for Dawn of the Zeds, or just anything else you're working on that you'd like to mention?
Well, as far as Zeds is concerned, I don't have anything for the third edition myself. All right, I know there's a couple of expansions in the works. One thing I have been thinking of doing is a lot of the comments I read on Board Game Geek have to do with the size of the game, the complexity of the game, the length of the game, all that kind of thing. So I've really come to the conclusion that I need to go back and revisit the first and second editions. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say edition 1.5, and what I'd like to do is go back to that more accessible 2-hour version of Zeds, retheme it. So I'm thinking of something along the lines of you have a new town in the future, it's a generation later, right? The
Ooh, yeah,
offspring of the heroes of Farmingdale are now living in a different town called
very
Oak Ridge.
cool.
And take, you know, I mean, I designed this game, like I said, 12 years ago. So I've learned a lot about game design since then. So I would like to retheme it, kind of a post-apocalyptic thing, and fix a lot of the things I wanted to fix for a long time, and maybe just add some new life into Zeds, and just, not a direct competition to Dawn of the Zeds, but rather just a new look at it. Right?
Right, reimagine it a bit. Very
Right.
cool. That sounds
Thanks.
awesome. And then I know you have like a ton of war games and other kind of more hybrid games you're kind of doing too.
Yeah, well, on the war game front, I'm busier now. I've been retired for 2 years now, and I'm more busy now than I was when I worked for a living. So I've got a ton of new war game titles coming out. My big project is with GMT. There's a game on the P500 called the Plum Island Horror.
Right,
And
right.
this is exactly what we were talking about before, is I've taken a lot of the experience of cooperative games, and I've created a horror game that is a true asymmetric cooperative design,
Ooh, I
right?
know, I'm excited.
So yeah, it does have tracks, but it's not really states of siege. It's more what actually influenced me was I've done two games on the Dunkirk evacuation, right? In 1940 during World War
Okay.
II.
Mm-hmm.
People have seen the movie,
Right, right,
and
right.
and I always thought that the whole premise of trying to evacuate people, right? So Dunkirk is not really a war game in the sense that you're trying to defeat the Germans coming in, and you're trying to evacuate and save all the
Mm-hmm.
people right at Dunkirk off the
Mm-hmm.
beaches. So I always thought, well, that would make a great setting for a horror theme, right? Where the horror is coming down, you're on an island, and you have to arrange to get these people off and all that.
Yeah,
And that's what the Plum Island Horror is.
cool.
It's this accident at a at a laboratory, a very innocent laboratory, of course, and and all these monsters come out. They start heading down, and all the people run a different faction that lives on the island. They all have asymmetric powers. They do very specialized things. It's influenced by the turn order is influenced by Aeon's End, the way they do it. I've got story cards like
Cool.
Eldritch Horror and Arkham Horror.
Awesome.
I've got exploding dice like they use in Descent and some of those, all the things that I love about all those other
All in
games.
there.
I jammed it in
I love it.
there.
I love it. That sounds
We
really
have
awesome.
a follow mechanic. If you've ever played Tiny Epic Galaxies, that follow mechanic, I always thought that was brilliant because it keeps everybody involved in the game.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
You can't walk away from the table, because as soon as I finish my turn, you have options going around the table.
Right.
And what I did with the Plum Island Horror is you have those options, but I love push your luck games too. So I have a game design called the Magnificent Style and Crowbar, where you just do it's a push your luck type of mechanism.
Hmm.
So as you go around the table, the other players can take a mini turn, but if they do, they risk setting off a bad event. So it
Oh.
creates this whole back and forth of don't take a turn because you're going to release the Kraken or whatever, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
so,
so
as
cool.
people go around, they get a little selfish because, well, I want to turn because I want to do this. I'll take the risk of setting off something horrible happening, and it goes around the table, and it ramps up as you go around. So that whole
Very
follow
interesting.
mechanics in that game. So it's just a joy. If people want to look at it, it's on Board Game Geek. It has its own page, but yeah, that was a fun design. It really
I'm
was.
definitely, yeah, that one caught my eye when they first went on P500. It looks really interesting, and I love like just hearing that you blended so many different influences into it. That's really cool.
Yep.
Awesome,
I tried
awesome.
anyway. I hope it works.
Cool. Well, thanks again, Herman. Been great talking to you. Thanks for coming
Thank you
on.
so much. It's a real honor to be on your show. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks again. Thank you all for watching Cardboard Creations. Hopefully it's been as inspiring and fascinating for you as it has been for me. And remember, the only way to get something done is to start doing it.